Welcome to This Week in Racing, and before you start typing away on your computer, I want to be very clear that this show today, despite the fact that we are going to be touching on the President of the United States, talking about Donald Trump at the Daytona 500, this show is not going to contain any of my personal opinions of Donald Trump or his policies. For a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm a race car guy. You guys are here to talk about racing with me, and even though it's an opinion show, I don't really think it's my place to give you my political opinion or endorse or disavow candidates. And number two, just for that reason, I don't want to be the reason that you decide to vote for or against somebody. Again, one of the things that I will advocate for here on my platform is that you are an informed citizen. You are an individual, and you should, do your own research. Decide what you value, what is important to you with the candidates. Look at their voting record, look at their personal opinions, both now and in the past. And once you have made your decision, go out and vote. And specifically, I want to make this message clear to the young people who watch my channel. If young people voted more, we would get politicians that would have our best interest at heart in office. Unfortunately, and no offense to the boomers, but the boomers go out and vote. And oftentimes that means that the stuff that young people are most interested and passionate about doesn't get done in government because they don't have to pander to us because we don't vote. So the only political thing I will advocate for on this show right now is to be an informed citizen, make up your own mind, vote for the candidate that best suits you and your values, and actually vote for them. Anyway, we've got a whole big show that's not just bigly about Trump. We've got Jimmie Johnson talk. We've got America's Hypercar that we get to talk about. And we also get to talk about the huge changes to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and some things that are staying the same. Let's get going this week in racing. IndyCar tested this weekend with their spring training open test at Circuit of the Americas, and we finally discovered at least somewhat the puzzle pieces that are kind of finalized for Carlin Racing going forward this year. We found out last week that Max Chilton was driving the 59 car, potentially Connor Daly running the ovals, the non-Indy 500 ovals for that car. But specifically, Carlin Racing in their second car appears to be splitting it between Felipe Nasr as well as Sergio Sete Camara, two Brazilian drivers, one with Formula 1 experience, one with Formula 2 experience. Of course, Nasr races full-time in IMSA, so there may be some conflicts down the line, and it's also unclear how the budgets are going to work out between these two drivers and how they are going to end up splitting the number 31 Carlin car for the IndyCar season. Of course, there's also the question of whether or not both drivers will be entered in the Indianapolis 500. Carlin Racing had 3 solo entries last year, so if they were keeping up with that, Nasr, Sete Camara, and Max Chilton would be 3 entries. We'll just have to wait and see. Scuderia Cameron Glickenhaus revealed their diagrams for their Hypercar program. Now, Glickenhaus, despite the name that includes Scuderia, is actually an American car brand, and there haven't been many at all American car brands involved in the top class of Le Mans prototype racing for quite some time. So I want to point this out and draw attention to it because this is a potentially very exciting program going forward into World Motorsports and specifically at the 24 Hours of Le Mans going forward. Some positive news and some sad news for the WEC as well as Le Mans. Rebellion Racing, one of the stalwarts of the LMP1 division, will end their program post-Le Mans 2020 this year and will not continue into the 2020-2021 WEC season. Rebellion Racing has been around since around 2008 and have had some fantastic liveries, some fantastic drivers, really been a fan favorite team on the World Championship side of things. They also ran a couple of IMSA races recently, as well as a partial season in the ALMS, American Le Mans Series, in its final season in 2013. So Rebellion Racing has really been a great contributor in some of the lean years of sports car racing, and it's kind of sad to see them closing up shop. Adam Stern has reported quite a bit of NASCAR inside baseball dirt, and one of the things that was most shocking to me and many other folks within the NASCAR community, and I have to say there weren't many positive things to say about this, is that NASCAR is considering punishing tracks that cannot maintain more than 70% attendance at their races. And I don't have to tell you, at least I hope I don't have to tell you, why this is a bad idea. NASCAR fans constantly lament the loss of tracks like Rockingham and North Wilkesboro. And policies like this are some of the policies that directly led to some of those tracks having to close their doors, lose events, or become test tracks. You know, especially Wilkesboro, it was deemed too small by NASCAR, and that's part of the reason they closed. They moved to bigger 1.5 mile style cookie cutter tracks because they could hold more people. Well, unfortunately, now that the sport has begun to right size, a lot of these tracks are struggling for attendance. I mean, again, many people went right to Indianapolis as the prime example, but other people are talking about Texas. And I have to tell you, this is not a great idea to shake down tracks for more money when everybody in the sport is hurting for revenue. I just can't say strongly enough that this is not a great idea from NASCAR, and I hope they don't move forward with it because it'll just end up hurting the racetracks. And yes, here's the big controversial story. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, is coming to the Daytona 500 and will be the grand marshal of the event. He will actually give the command for the drivers to start their engines. Now, it's not the first time that Donald Trump has come to an auto race, and specifically the Daytona 500. Trump attended in 1999 as well as 2001, and just a little bit of a side note, he was also at the Indy Racing League's first race in 1996 at Walt Disney World. So not got a great track record in terms of black days in the history of the sport. Now, why would a politician come to a NASCAR race? Well, it's actually pretty interesting. Generally speaking, in election years, there's been kind of a recent theory that there is a NASCAR voter demographic, believe it or not. In political circles and political pundits, they kind of believe that this is some sort of a voting group. So oftentimes politicians will attend NASCAR races, especially in key battleground states like Florida, which generally are politically neutral and flip to one side or the other based on the year and based on the policies of the certain candidates. You had the really first major example was Ronald Reagan in 1984 at the Firecracker 400 at Daytona. Ironically, that was Richard Petty's 200th win. There's so many famous photos of Ronald Reagan after the race eating fried chicken with the NASCAR drivers, which is kind of funny. George Bush attended the 2004 Daytona 500. Again, another election year. That was Dale Jr.'s first 500 win. And then we kind of get to some of the more wacky things that have happened more recently. Michelle Obama actually attended the 2011 Homestead race. Again, 2012 was an election year, so they were trying to get some NASCAR votes or get some eyeballs on the Obama campaign. But Michelle Obama was booed, unfortunately, by the NASCAR fans, and I do wonder what will happen with Donald Trump. Will he get booed, or will he get a big reception? We'll just have to wait and see. But to kind of go off of that, because of that being the final race of the season, Tony Stewart was invited to the White House. So Tony Stewart got to meet Barack Obama. And I think a couple more times recently with Team Penske and Joey Logano, we've seen NASCAR stars invited to the White House. So again, this is one that I think the comment section is going to have to hash out. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing that the President of the United States is not only coming to Daytona, but he's going to be in a very prominent role? We'll just have to see how that goes. We are 100 days out as I make this video from the 104th running of the Indianapolis 500. And today, Roger Penske, the helm of IMS, has given us a kind of a game plan of what they are going to upgrade and kind of their game plan going forward into the 104th running of the Indianapolis 500. There are some really exciting things on this list. Number one, bump day is changing. Bumping is still happening. No locked-in spots, but they are expanding the bumping process to a 75-minute session, which is interesting and also excellent. It's going to be a lot more like it used to be back in the day. the purse is going to be increased by $2 million up to a $15 million purse. And Roger Penske specifically mentioned that whoever wins the race will get a minimum of $2 million to win the race. Almost certainly will be higher based on lap prizes, pole positions, pit stop competition, stuff like that. 45 more horsepower will be available to the teams during Indianapolis 500 qualifications. The intention is to raise the speeds, though they didn't exactly say that they would be track record speeds, though I would think with a couple of years of development, possibly a new chassis, that may be another discussion that we may be having soon. Indianapolis will also add 30 video boards and upgrade the bathrooms of the racetrack, as well as add 5G cell phone service for the entire track. Finally, the winner's circle will be changed, or at least the winner's circle process will be changed, where the car will be raised up on the podium so that hopefully more fans will be able to see the winner of the race. So obviously for this channel, the big news is that not only did I have a ton of respect for Roger Penske, and now even more than I did today or after today, because Roger Penske, in no uncertain terms, essentially said he was wrong about his opinion of bump day, or at least he had changed his opinion. He has realized that the fans want bump day. It's important to keep the month of May valuable at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and he's not going to lock in spots. Now, he's changed, as I just told you, the bump day process to give the teams more time to qualify. And honestly, if you went back to my videos last year where I talked about the changes they were making to bump day, this was exactly my point of contention. I said the teams didn't have enough time. I thought one attempt, yeah, that's exciting for TV, but it's not necessarily the most fair thing for the competitors. That's out the window now. It's very similar now to the old bump day where you have an hour and a half, and if you can't get in the show in 3 or 4 attempts, which seems like about what you're probably going to get if you're in that last row shootout, you don't deserve to be in the 500. I think it's just a great change. I have to just completely give them all the credit in the world. They fixed my one problem with it. It's probably going to be a perfect format next year. We're going to have the legit 33 starters, truly the fastest 33. I'm good with it. And here's the other thing. Mark Miles teased 36 cars. Now that's very interesting because we're having trouble, many of us who are trying to put this list together. Where are these entries going to come from this year, especially with the talk of Fernando Alonso potentially not being in the show? Okay, well then maybe that's one car gone. What about Juncos Racing? We don't know. But Mark Miles, I would assume, knows what the entry forms are looking like a lot better than we do. And he said 36 cars, or at least about 36 cars, so maybe 35. I think I'll make a video about that. Well, I'll see if I can get to 36 cars. That could be fun. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the purse increasing. Now, I had seen that the Daytona purse, and this would actually surprise me, is the Daytona 500 purse is actually much larger than the Indy 500 purse. I saw it was something like $23 million, and they'd increased it this year. That surprised me. I didn't think it was bigger than the Indy 500, and B, I didn't realize it was that much bigger than the Indy 500. So I certainly would like to see the 500 purse continue to increase, maybe an extra $1 million each year, and eventually get it up to that $20–30 million range, so that maybe the winner gets, $4 or $5 million, and even to start the race, maybe you get $500,000 at the very least. That pays for your chassis or a tire bill, depending if you've already paid your chassis off. Things like that, or your engine lease. I mean, there's so much expense that goes into the Indy 500. I'm hoping to see that purse increase. I think that would be a great thing. The general infrastructure things, I mean, I can't speak too authoritatively on that. Adding 30 video boards, including some big boards they're going to put up on the pagoda, I think that's going to be great from a spectator perspective. There was an emphasis, I remember Doug Bowles as well as Roger Penske were talking about timing and scoring and data. That's great. That's going to be fun as a spectator at the race to be able to see what's going on a lot more clearly. And certainly there are a lot of seats, at least in the past at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where you certainly couldn't see the whole track. And if you couldn't see a video board, you really only have your field of vision to keep track of the race and hopefully the PA, unless you brought a scanner. You've got the bathrooms. The bathrooms have definitely needed work at IMS. I'll just put it this way: if you've been in the bathrooms at IMS, you know what the problems are. I don't need to go into it. And finally, the 5G. I really haven't had too many cell phone problems at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but I know there are a lot of people who have. So that's a good thing. And then finally, the winner's circle, the car actually being raised back up onto the podium. That's the way they used to do it in like the 70s, 80s, 90s. I think all the way up to the 2000s when they kind of redid everything for Formula One. I think they took away kind of that raised winner's podium. So it's good to see it back. And outside of that, I mean, I'm feeling really positive about this. And this is the first 100 days. You know, what is this going to look like 3, 5, 10, 20 years down the line under Penske ownership? I don't know. It's a brave new world. And speaking of brave new world, how about another big star potentially coming to IndyCar racing? One of the big spring training stories I didn't really touch on was the potential that Jimmie Johnson could be racing in IndyCar next year, and not only that, for multiple races. He was at Circuit of the Americas as a guest of Zach Brown and McLaren, and he was not making any bones about it. He's almost certainly going to be in an IndyCar next year on multiple road and street races. And one of the other things, I think it was the interview with Jake Query, he actually, you know, we always think of Jimmie Johnson as kind of a driver that, you know, maybe at one point considered doing a race like the Indy 500 or oval IndyCar races. Clearly, he's got a family now. Maybe, and I think he's actually had some hardline answers where he's been like, no, absolutely not. It's funny, he gave an answer that was a lot softer than I had heard in the past, where he was like, you know, the Indy 500, you know, the time has probably passed me by on that. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't a hard no, and he's given hard no's to that before. I'm not saying he's going to do it, but I will say this. I think the windscreen, you know, love it or hate it, and I was actually surprised in my video yesterday how many people had comments expressing that they really didn't like the windscreen. I think the windscreen is definitely going to help a lot of these stars that have had a roof over their head or cockpit protection. You look at Scott McLaughlin, and now you're looking at Jimmie Johnson, guys like that. I think it'll make him a lot more comfortable coming and giving IndyCars a try. I mean, let's make no bones about it, and I'm not going to pretend like the windscreen is a magic bullet, because it's not. IndyCars are still incredibly dangerous race cars, no matter what track they're on. But something like that, I think, helps with the mental attitude of a lot of these drivers. Just in the case of, well, okay, if I drive into a wreck and there's pieces flying all over the place, chances are nothing's going to hit me in the head. But, you know, just in general, even though Indy cars generally, you know, because they race at 230 miles an hour, they do crash very hard. But I think many drivers are able to, I think most successful drivers anyway, are able to kind of put that out of their mind for the most part, especially when you have a much more familiar safety component there, like with the windscreen, versus a cup car where, again, you've got, you know, a Lexan or whatever screen in front of you. I think, again, I think you'll probably see more and more outside star talent and star power willing to try Indy cars now because of that safety device. So if you're bitching about that, I've got news for you. You probably wouldn't be getting Jimmie Johnson potentially driving a McLaren at the Indy GP or Road America or Barber or Long Beach next year because he just, you know, wouldn't feel totally safe. And now he may feel that way. Again, that's a little bit of speculation, but I feel like a lot of that and a lot of these stars coming over now is because of that, and being more open and willing to say, yeah, I'm going to try this. He also talked about doing some off-road trophy truck stuff, because that's kind of where he came from. I think it's going to be fun to see what happens with Jimmie Johnson. Sports car racing, potentially. I'll make a bet with you right now. I bet you he'll be in the Rolex 24 next year, and he'll probably be in a Cadillac. And I guess that's the other thing. He'll probably be very GM focused, which isn't a problem with McLaren, because of course they have a Chevy power plant. And, you know, I'm sure they have the funding and the capability, and Jimmie Johnson would as well, to get funding for one car, you know, on a one-off basis, 4 or 5 races per season. And again, you know, you look at the guys like Scott McLaughlin, the star power in IndyCar, I mean, I saw comments about this, and I thought about it, and it's just an incredible amount of star power. And now, not just at races like the Indianapolis 500, you've got Scott McLaughlin coming for the Indy GP, potentially Jimmie Johnson at the Long Beach Grand Prix next year. All these big stars. It's an exciting time to be an IndyCar fan. I will tell you that right now. So that's this week in racing. I'll leave you with this. I think the prediction for the Daytona 500, if you listen to me on the NASCAR Weekly Podcast, I already gave it to you, but I think it's going to be Kyle Busch. Could be completely wrong, could get taken out on the first lap, but I think the Toyotas have been working very well together. I think they will have the best strategy, and I think of the Toyota drivers, Kyle Busch is the most driven, the most hungry, and the best driver. We'll just have to wait and see. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsport content, and I will see you in the next video.